Now comes the fun part, because we get to sit down at the sewing machine, relax, all of our cutting is done, and play with the designs and the pieces on the design wall. I have to point out that it's very important to work from a design wall because I have to stay organized as I am working on this project. It's so easy to make a mistake when putting this quilt together, because if you don't have the triangles turned right, your pattern is lost. So you want to make sure that you have all of your pieces laying up there as you're going to sew them together. The other thing that I'm really thankful for is that I get to sit at a nice new sewing machine, which is called the Quattro by Brother. It has a lot of beautiful features on it, and I get to share those with you. First of all, because it has the ability to move the needle position, I'm able to find my perfect scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Ahead of time, I have already set my seam allowance where I think it needs to be, but I think we should still take that sewing test and make sure that we have a correct seam allowance. Down in front of me here, I carefully selected one of the yellow ones, a purple one, and a blue one, because in each of my blocks I want to evenly distribute that color throughout the quilt. When you look up at the design wall, you'll see that within every one of these groupings I have carefully placed one of the blue purple ones, a yellow one, and one of the smaller triangles up here is also purple. Then again, notice that in the next size triangle I have done the same thing. To evenly distribute those colors, even though it was a batik, I still select from my pieces so I get the color evenly distributed throughout. And then when I get to this size triangle, I have again made sure that I have a little bit of each of those colors in there. The larger triangle as well, I take note of where it's sitting in the quilt, because when you cut that whole strip, you'll get a variety of color in each of them, and then I have the opportunity to move them around so I have the right placement. Remember when at the end of my cutting, I addressed the straight of grain in each of the pieces? On one edge of your triangles, you have the straight of grain, and on the other two edges, you have a bias edge. Well, when putting these together, I like to take so that I have one of the straight of grains always next to one of the bias edges of the piece that I'm putting on top. Triangles are one of the easiest pieces to do in patchwork, because look at how easy it is to match those corners. All three of them are perfectly matched. I start out by sewing on an anchor cloth first, and then guiding the fabric with my stiletto. We'll do a little bit of chain sewing, and I won't take time to show you the bias and the straight of grain each time because I can see it close up myself. Guide the fabric with your stiletto each time. Chain sewing will really save time, but you don't want to do a lot of it until you know you have passed your sewing test. So we'll just do 3 of them. Truth be known, ahead of time I checked to make sure it was right, but I still want to check again. So often when you're sewing in your sewing room, you shut the machine off, and when you come back up, you go, uh-oh, something's wrong. They're not fitting. you forgot to change how you had originally set your machine. Okay, now we have the first two pieces put together. When I sew the triangles together, I always press the seam away from the center triangle of that unit. So first finger press, and then I would take the time to press with the iron after I've done that. Now the second triangle will go on top, again making sure that you have matched the edges on all three corners. Now we will turn it, and when I sew this seam, I come right into the crevice right in here. So guide it with your stiletto. I really don't think I could do this without my stiletto. I really count on it a lot. This way I'm not taking the time to insert any pins either. Okay, we'll do the next one. Remember that you press it away from that center triangle, just like that. And you know, batiks have a lot of sizing in them, so you really can almost get by without pressing them because of the way that the fabric is handled before we get it. It really lays really nice. Okay, guide with the stiletto, hold on to that little tail, sew into the crevice, and we just about have the second triangle put on all of them. See how nice it is to chain sew? You save thread that way too. Okay, now we're going to move that second triangle away from that middle. So now we just have one more left to add on. Again, matching the ear up here, the ear or the corner here, and the one down here. So let's put that one on. Ending up in the crevice is where you want to be, and to save a little time, I'll sew off onto an anchor cloth, and let's see if we have passed. Hopefully, so I don't have to change my seam allowance. You don't want to wait till you get to the whole or to the final end of your patchwork and then check it out. Before we go any farther, let's make sure that we have passed our sewing test. So what I'm going to show you how to do is place template in up on top of those pre-sewn triangles, and make sure that all of the edges are matched and that it's just the ear on the outside edge. Well, it looks like we've passed our sewing test, so what I'm going to do is remove those ears and just simply turn the board each time, removing that little bit of ear. Make sure everything's lined up before you trim it off. And now when you look closely at that trimmed off triangle, you'll see that you still have your 1/4 inch from this point to this point on all three sides. That's a very important part of this process. So there you have your blue and your yellow one ready to go into one of the units. Always remember to close the blade on your rotary cutter so somebody doesn't accidentally pick it up and cut themselves. Now back to the sewing machine. We'll continue on by adding more triangles. When you look at the design wall, you'll see that the next part to add is the N triangle, which sits in the middle of each of these units. And again, reminding you that I have carefully placed a yellow, a blue, and a green one, in this case, in each of the sets. The first seam that I'm going to sew is this one right here, so we'll put these right sides together. You want to sew this seam with the 3 or the 4 triangles that we sewed in the first step on top of the one underneath, because we want to see this intersection when we're sewing, because we want to have another perfect point on the right side. And remember, we've passed that sewing test, and it just happens that those pieces match the triangle perfectly that's underneath. That's a very important part. You always want to check your sewing to make sure that you continually match up. So guiding your fabric with the stiletto. Now when I get to this part, I want to sew directly over the intersection where these 2 seams have crossed over. So let's see if we can get that right. Looks like we did, but we'll still check and see. Then off to the end and sew onto an anchor cloth instead of just cutting your thread. That will save time, thread, and it keeps those ending stitches on your patchwork as strong as the center stitches that were sewn. So remove that. Oh, look at that. That's perfect. On the first one, we always pressed our seams away from the center. Now that we know we have a perfect point here, we can continue on by pressing that seam away from that center triangle. Now taking the next size triangle, we can add the last 2 parts to this unit. And remember, we addressed that straight of grain issue before. This is the straight of grain on this part, so now I want to put a bias edge on top of that one. The quilt will lay strainer, especially when you're working with triangles, if you have one of the seams on the bias and one on the straight of grain. So placing this under, guiding it with the stiletto will give you the benefit of a lot more accuracy. Always take the time to readjust so that your edges are matched. We've just about completed this unit, and then I can show you how to continue on. Again, press away from the center, finger pressing. And these fabrics are so beautiful to work with because of all the sizing in them. The last triangle that I'm going to add is the end triangle, and this will complete this part of the block. And remember, always leave an anchor cloth under your machine so you're ready to go on to the next one. Readjust at the end, making sure that when you sew to the end, your stitches end up in the crevice, which will give you that nice perfect triangle in the end. And now we're ready to pass our second sewing test. I like to test my way all the way through, as you can tell. But before we do that, we will finger press. See how nice that looks? We have our 1/4 inch here, our 1/4 inch here, here, and here. Everything is finger pressed, and we know that we passed that sewing test, but let's see if we have passed the next one. So now you can place that patchwork down on your cutting table, lay this triangle up on top, and we have a perfect match. And repeating what we did before, we'll trim off this ear, this one, and this one. I don't have to show you how to sew the rest of these because it's just a repeat of what we've already done. But I do try to remember to evenly distribute the color. Now these two will be connected together, so we'll put those right sides together. The only thing you have to remember here is that this triangle is the one that's next or the closest to the O template or the O shape on the bottom. You don't have to pin if you have perfectly matched everything. So use the stiletto and that can do your pinning for you. Okay, now we'll readjust down here, matching up this point down here. Again, we want to sew over this intersection. Looks like we're going to hit it right on. These are some of the easiest quilts to do because the shape is the same throughout the whole quilt. The angles are the same, so it truly is a beginner quilt. And the advanced quilters like to do this project because you can experiment with all kinds of colors. Also a good way to use up your scraps. So let's see what we have this time. We'll make sure that we put it together right. Again, pressing away. Oh, that's perfect. Press it away. Nope, I did it wrong. I gotta press away from that center. So we'll have this on top. And pressing away from that center triangle. Always moving away from the center. See how nice that looks? Then we'll put the next one towards the top, and then that one would go there, just matching up that point to this point down here and connecting that one on. Again, we have another good point. We'll finger press that, move it away. And the last one that you would add would be this one right in here. And I don't need to sew that one, but you can see how it's done. You would just put this right sides together, match these 2 points out here, and sew that seam. Then after you have all of those connected, you start connecting it to the larger P piece, which is on the background. And the very last triangle, remember the half triangle, that's the one that finishes off or starts and ends your row. So you'll have that one over there, and then this one would be on the opposite end of the row. I've had a lot of fun showing you how to put the Northern Lights together today. I hope you can join me again on Inspired by Shar.